Thank you all for coming for this talk, which was advertised as a German soldier in America, the Reisebeschreibung von America by the Regiment Royal Deux-Ponts from Zweibrücken. Now, a question that arises, of course, is what is a German soldier doing in America? A German soldier who in this case, being from Zweibrücken, means he's not one of the Hessians because they are farther up north in Germany, and they are on the other side of the question, of course, as they say. Well, the answer is, how did he get here? Well, he got here by boat because on the 11th of July 1780, a French fleet carrying about 7,000 soldiers and 4,500 officers and naval personnel, etc., arrived off Newport, Rhode Island. Why did they come here? The reason why we have thousands of French forces now landing in Newport, Rhode Island in the summer of 1780, the reasons go back at least 4 years, namely to the summer of 1776, when the Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, declares independence of the United States from the King of Great Britain, from King Georg III, and names their country the United States of America. But in the Declaration of Independence is an important introduction, the first lines that are in there. The Congress says that the history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. And to prove this, let the facts be submitted to a candid world. And the question is then, of course, who is this candid world to whom this Declaration of Independence is directed? Who is Congress talking to? Obviously, Congress is not talking to King George III. The king knows that these colonies want to become independent because by the 4th of July, eight states have already declared their independence. New Jersey is the 4th state to do so. No, the Congress is talking to this man primarily, the King of France. In January of 1776, which is months before the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Paine, one of the chief propagandists really of the American independence movement in the American Revolution, in January of 1776, Paine wrote in Common Sense, and I quote him, that everything that is right or natural pleads for separation. It is time to part. Nothing can settle our affairs so expeditiously as an open and determined declaration of independence, because neither France nor Spain will give us any kind of assistance while we profess ourselves to be the subjects of Britain. The customs of all courts are against us and will be so until by independence we take rank with other nations. And that is important because what Paine is writing here is the background for what we read in the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence, right, is a statement of principles. All men are created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights, among them
to free speech.
Among them, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, he told you not to sit in the front.
He did tell me not to sit up here.
It is also, of course, a list of grievances, right? The King of England has done this, has not done this, has done that. But the Declaration of Independence also has a foreign policy component, and that foreign policy component is to bring in France into this war. The principles, justification really for the Declaration of Independence, what the King of England has done and then this foreign policy component to being in France, because the founding fathers knew full well that these colonists who just declared their independence have neither an army, nor guns, nor money, nor map makers, you name it. They don't have it. They will need help. And the only country where help could come from is, of course, France, and to a lesser degree from Spain. And France does listen to and does hear America's call for help, because even before news of the Declaration of Independence reaches France, the French War Minister Saint-Germain has already ordered an inventory of artillery pieces of the Valier system that France doesn't need anymore to be made, etc. And so by the spring of 1777, the first of a dozen vessels hired by Beaumarchais is on its way to the United States. And these pieces of artillery in particular are already used, and some of the muskets are already used at Saratoga in the fall of 1777. And if you ever take a look at this famous painting by Trumbull of the surrender at Saratoga, there you see a cannon where Gates has his hand on, and if you look carefully, this is a French gun because it's got dolphin handles. There are very few portraits or paintings, and Trumbull makes his painting in the 1820s, already much later, but even contemporary paintings like the Washington Battle of Princeton, for example, they all have these French guns on there. They are thank you notes to the King of France and messages to the King of England, of course. Look who our allies are. There's always a message in all of this. And this plan to support the American rebels is drawn up by the Comte de Rochambeau, the French foreign minister, is drawn up in the spring of 1775. Again, this is all before the Declaration of Independence, that France is getting ready to support these rebels. And when news of Lexington and Concord reaches the government of France, France is ready, but we all know then that the next step is in the spring of 1778, when France signs treaties of alliance and friendship, military alliance and friendship in February of 1778. And we all know that from then on the war doesn't go too well for the Americans, and by the fall of 1779, spring of 1780, even Washington says we're at the end of our tether. Deliverance must come now. We had the mutinies at Morristown, then down in the Carolinas, Cornwallis is doing whatever he wants to do. And so this is the critical situation for the survival of the American revolutionary movement when France decides to send forces for stationing on the American mainland in the spring of 1780. Both the request basically from Washington, from Congress, to send troops, as well as the acceptance of that request, is a very, very difficult decision to be made. Because if you are French in 1780, right, you're French and you're Catholic, and the French and Indian War's been over, how many years? There are 3 strikes right against you in there. And when they eventually decide to come to Newport, Rhode Island, right? Talk about anti-Catholic feelings. This is the potential for conflict. Bringing French troops into Rhode Island or into Massachusetts is enormous. I mean, we just had an incident where a French naval officer is killed in Boston, and the monument is still there where King's Chapel used to be. The decision to send these troops here is a very difficult decision, but it had to be made at that point. Even even keep taking all the risks that are potentially involved, all of this. And so Rochambeau lands then in July of 1780 with his troops. And one of the soldiers in the 4 infantry regiments, and here you see the 4 infantry regiments that Rochambeau brings with him. One of the soldiers in one of these infantry regiments is the Georg Daniel Flohr in the Royal Deux-Ponts regiment in the blue uniform. Deux-Ponts is Zweibrücken. The ruler of Zweibrücken is a Duke of the House of Wittelsbach, which later becomes the Kings of Bavaria, and the color of that house, the colors are blue and yellow, hence this uniform, because the Royal Deux-Ponts regiment is one of 12 German-speaking regiments in the French army. We got German-speaking regiments, we got 3 Irish regiments, we have an Italian regiment. The French army of the Ancien Regime before the French Revolution is a very multinational, multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-religious army in there. That is possible to do in the age before the French Revolution, in the age before nationalism. Once we get this concept of a nation state, where you all have the same culture, language, etc., then multinational armies like this simply disappear in Europe and around the world. Among the other troops here is the artillery and Lauzon's legion that make up these roughly 5,000 men that come with Rochambeau. And as I said, one of them is Georg Daniel Flohr. What do we know about him? The information about the man himself is fairly scanty. The parish record that you see behind me tells us that Georg Daniel was the only child of Johann Paul Flohr and his wife Susanna, born Torvald, and he was born, and that's the marriage record. They were married on the 11th of May 1756 after an abbreviated pregnancy. He was born on the 27th of August 1756 already in the small suburb of Annweiler in the Duchy of Pfalz-Zweibrücken, and is baptized in the Lutheran Church on the 31st of August. Here is a 1740s sketch of what this Annweiler and Sandstall looked like around the time when Flohr was born. It's a tiny little village back then, and even today it is not much bigger. Today it probably has about 250 inhabitants. You see most of the town right here on this photograph. His house, where he was born, is toward the end on the left-hand side. Well, the house doesn't stand anymore, it's all been redone. So this is where he is from. 1756 is the birthday that will go with, even though when he enlists in 1776, it says he was born in 1758. And here we have the enlistment record. It says born 1758 in Annweiler, in the province of Deux-Ponts, in the jurisdiction of Zabern. Is 5 feet 8 inches tall, black hair, black eyes, a longish face, and a small nose. A couple of years later, when the new control is created, his birthday is given at 1760. That gives you an idea how difficult it can be to do statistics about Rochambeau's army, or the Continental Army for that matter as well. Not to mention that the spelling that they used back then is a high schooler's dream, because there are no rules apparently. But here we have him, and why his mother's name is given as Werner on his enlistment record, I don't know, because clearly, according to the marriage record of the parents, it was not. But Back to Flohr, he was orphaned at the age of 5 by the death of his father, who had been a butcher, a small farmer, something like that. And then the widowed mother raises the family, Flohr, Georg Daniel, as well as the 5 children from her husband's previous marriage. We don't know anything about his education, about his trade, but he clearly went to school and learned how to read and to write, because the journal that he keeps is just wonderful, and as you saw from the title page, as well as the sketches of the communities, villages that are in his journal. So he clearly got a good education, because the handwriting and the spelling and all that, there are no grammatical errors or spelling errors, etc. in this journal. It's very well done. At some point, when he was about 20, he decided it was time to move on. We don't know why he decided to enlist in the Royal Deux-Ponts, but what I found when I went through the enlistment records, and these controls are organized chronologically, and whenever every 4 years they start a new one, because all the men who have died or deserted or promoted, whatever, are taken out, you get a new control. But what I noticed in there, that in this, right around this time period when he enlists, there's a whole group of people from his neighborhood, not necessarily from Sunshine, but from Unweil and other villages, who decide to enlist. So, you know, it's like a fever almost, like, you know, just like emigrating, let's go to America. This can infect people the same with, you know, we had a couple beers too many, let's go down and enlist, something like that seems to have happened. Just like a couple years after the regiment is back in Germany, there are a couple dozen men desert and they emigrate to Hungary for whatever reason. So there's a lot of, could be some irrational impetus behind it, but we probably will never know. He enlists in the Royal Deux-Ponts, in the first battalion of the regiment under the Freiherr von Bode, and who declines to accompany the regiment to America. That's because his wife is English, and he may have not relished the thought of having to fight potentially against his wife's family, and so he gets a new captain by the name of Sundal. Flohr is already stationed on the coast near Brest in preparation of an attack on Great Britain that is cancelled. And so when Rochambeau makes his decision to which units to embark, he takes the ones that are closest to his coast. You know, why take a unit that's stationed on the Rhine? It takes him 2 months to march across France. That's one of the reasons why the Royal Deux-Ponts is picked and why Flohr is among those that come over here. The other reason is it's a German-speaking regiment. What is the argumentation behind? The argumentation behind that is that Rochambeau will have lost us to death on the transatlantic, dying over here, battle potentially, there will be desertions, etc., etc. And so the idea is, behind it is, then we take men from the Royal Deux-Ponts, and who already know the French drill and everything, and put them into the French-speaking units, and fill up the gaps in the Royal Deux-Ponts by recruiting among Hessians, German speakers that are over here, but the Hessian deserters, Hessian POWs from Saratoga, for example, there's a whole bunch here, and a lot of them are in Pennsylvania, right? They try this. Does it work? No. These Hessian deserters take the enlistment bonus, etc., and then even on the way to the units recruited in Baltimore and Philadelphia, on the way to Newport, they already deserted along the way. So by the fall of 1780, within a couple months, Rochambeau says, no, thank you, that's not a good idea, because it's also expensive, because even if they make it to Newport, they take their uniforms, their weapons, everything with them as it is. And the other aspect then, of course, is as this regiment then marches to Yorktown, they march through Pennsylvania. And there's a lot of people in Pennsylvania who speak German, right? And they're all from the Palatinate, and Zweibrücken is in the Palatinate. Flohr says that a third of the regiment or more, and we'll get to that in a minute, found friends and relatives, etc. And as a matter of fact, I was over in France last summer for the anniversary of the birth of Rochambeau, the 100th anniversary, and there was a woman who came up to me afterwards, and her ancestor had been in the Royal Deux-Ponts, had been over here with them, and met relatives that had emigrated. She had proof of that. So when Flohr says, a third of the regiment found friends of relatives, there's actually proof, at least of one person that I know now that verifies that. So anyway, Flohr embarks, and his company embarks on the Comte de Noailles, is a recruiting poster in German, obviously. He embarks on the Comte de Noailles, a small a little boat which Baron von Closen describes as unpleasant due to the smells from people and dogs. A tarry little old tub, a tarry piece of bait, etc. It was clearly not a pleasant journey. The first attempt to sail out of Brest had to be aborted when the Comte de Noailles collides with the 74 gunship, the Conqueror, which leads to some tongue-in-cheek comments, of course, that you read whatever the Conqueror did to the Comte de Noailles. Eventually, the French fleet arrives in Newport, and under the Chevalier de Ternay, who's buried up there. His grave is up there. And in the first couple of pages of his Reisebeschreibung then, which begins with the departure from Brest already, on the first couple of pages, Flohr may have explained why he is keeping notes, why he wants to memorize or commemorate his journey through the Americas, but those first two pages are missing. We only know that he compiled his notes into the current manuscript nach gelegener Zeit, after a certain amount of time, that he sat down in Strasbourg in the spring of 1787, about 2.5 years after his discharge from the regiment. The purpose, as he says in a foreword, is to provide a description of America as I have scrupulously noted it down day after day during the war between England and the American colonies, that is to say, the cities, boroughs, villages, and properties of gentlemen, as well as the untamed lands that I crossed at that time, as well as traditions and customs of the inhabitants. So he has quite an ambitious project before him that he wants to do. But this statement describes in a nutshell also the extraordinary value, of course, of Flohr's journal, because his description of America is one of only 3 known accounts by enlisted men in Rochambeau's army, and the other 2 say basically nothing about the Americans themselves. There's an anonymous grenadier in the Bourbonnois regiment, and another is a soldier in the Soissonnois, André Amblard. But other than saying that New Jersey is the Garden of America, both of them, even though we know that New Jersey is totally devastated as the result of this war to the enlisted men. This is not the case. Neither is it the case for the officers, by the way. As I said yesterday, there's a real disconnect between what foreigners see in New Jersey and what New Jerseyans have been taught ever since in high school or wherever wherever you learn. That be that as it may, they don't tell us tell us anything about why they were sent over here. Why are they in America? What is this war all about? What are the causes of behind the Declaration of Independence? They don't know anything about it. How could they? And really, they don't have a dog in this fight. They were sent here. You are going to America, and that's it. He wasn't asked whether he wanted to come over here. If he heard about the ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, he doesn't mention it. And at this point in his life, doesn't apply these ideas to himself, even when he writes his journal after the war in 1787. Only much later in his writings, we find in his journal, we find an occasional statement such as that he had come to America to put an end to the British wreaking havoc on this beautiful country. Beautiful country. And again, this is a description you see in the writings of French officers and over again. There is a wonderful description by Count Dillon coming down Steel Gap Road, looking out toward Van Vechten's bridge there. And it's almost poetic how it describes the beauty of this country that's lying there before him. Not a single golden arches to be seen anywhere. So, beautiful country, which brings me really to the topic of what I want to talk about. On the 11th of July 1780, I said the French fleet carries lands in Newport, and I want to show you as many as these paintings or drawings of Newport that Flohr has in there. Here's the Rathaus up there, you see that here, and if you've been to Newport, you know where that is. Here are the two churches in there. Up here, here's the harbor of Newport, and the two islands, Goat Island, etc., that are in the harbor, and windmills up there in the sky. Anyway, first, this is the first what Flohr sees of America, and the first impression, the first impression had not been what he had expected, because fearing a British attack, that these were British vessels, not French vessels, he says that the white inhabitants had all gone into hiding, and the soldiers thought that the whole city was inhabited by blacks. They are the ones who come out and sell fresh fruit, etc., to the sailors on these ships. Encamped in Newport, then Flohr looked around the countryside and made contact with the locals. And unlike some of his officers who complained about the coldness and the reserve of Newporters, Flohr thought, and I quote, that he got along very well with them, with the locals. He's full of praise for the hospitality and the medical support provided to the hundreds of sick soldiers, mostly suffering from scurvy. And then he says, since we could talk precious little with them, every one of us soldiers tried to learn some English to caress the beautiful American maidens, particularly two of them called Hannah and Molly, who live in a windmill, he says, adjacent to the French camp. Beautiful American maidens. Those of you who were in an all-male military, after a couple of months, there's no such thing as an ugly woman. The freedoms granted to the younger generation, particularly to the girls, really surprised him. He writes that Once they're 16 years old, their father and mother must not forbid them anything anymore, cannot give them any orders or order on anything anymore, and if they have a lover, he can freely go with them without injury to their reputations. And it refers then to the concept of bundling, for example, which is unheard of outside New England, etc. He calls them the most beautiful women of all nations. No one may hit them on the pain of great punishment. And what he also says is that the soldiers of the Royal Deux-Ponts, and I quote, were particularly well liked by the girls since we were Germans, and they hold the German nation in very great esteem. When this was published edited and published, is available online in France, there's a big footnote in there concerning rise of German nationalism and all kinds of stuff. I think that goes a little too far, because we are in New England, and the French and Indian War is just like a couple of years over only. And New England had been under threat from Canada for decades. For decades, ministers in the churches of New England had been preaching about Satan and the popes and the burning of papal effigies and what have you, and Pope Day. This is still out there. This is, I would like to think this is more of a subconscious reaction between the locals and the French and the Germans in there. Because the German speakers who are in New England don't have that cultural baggage that the French have. And as I said yesterday, and Paul was there, when we talk about New England being a potentially dangerous environment, that means that one of the tasks that Rochambeau has as his forces are in this potentially dangerous environment is to try and gain the hearts and minds of the New Englanders. And he does this by the strictest discipline and with money. Because the big difference, one of the big differences between the Continental Army and the French Army is that Rochambeau has gold and silver. He pays in cash, not in IOUs and continental dollars, which eventually are good enough to start a fire in your fireplace with. So this distinction, which we see also in New York, it goes all the way down actually to Virginia, this distinction between the German speakers and the French, who's kind of accompanies Rochambeau's army all the way down the East Coast. Just like what we see over and over again also in his writing is the fact that Americans then realized that the French soldiers don't live on frogs and coarse vegetables, and they are well fed and etc. As Lobadier, one in Connecticut, he stopped with a local in I think it's Scotland, and the man says to him, "You can't be French, you're much too well fed." And he said, "Well, you must be Scottish." Just this recognition of who the French are is one of the big experiences for soldiers as they're over here. Flohr is also astonished by the seemingly peaceful coexistence of religious groups, particularly in New England. Not only do we have Lutherans, Reformed, and Catholics, and Flohr's mother was actually Reformed in the Reformed Church. The father was Lutheran, or was it the other way around? But he says there are also Congregationalists, German Reformed, Quakers, Dunkers, Anabaptists, Baptists, Jews, Presbyterians, Moravians, Seventh-day Adventists, Freemasons, and these are all groups that, if they exist in Germany where he's from, are persecuted. Which is why we have Moravians down in Georgia, for example, and in Rhode Island, but they take everybody. But that is clearly something he had never experienced in his life, which is why he talks about it quite quite a bit in his journal. He's also greatly impressed by the wealth and well-being of Rhode Islanders, because comparing the obviously prosperous farmers at the top of the social hierarchy in a very egalitarian society in New England with the often impoverished nobility of Germany, where he is from, he thought that these farmers that he met in New England lived in a style not only comparable to the nobility in Europe, but even more ostentatiously. It appeared to him that in New England all people are rich and well, with no difference between rich and poor. Everybody seemed to have coffee, tea, and chocolate. It seemed to be quite common among the people. He sees no difference in women's dress, whether it is a Sunday or a work day. They always dress like ladies of the nobility. And if they should have to travel even half an hour's distance, they will ride a horse or in a carriage. And he found that even more surprising, since one, as he says, one does not see a white person do any work, which made me wonder many a time where their wealth came from. Where does the wealth come from? It's the abundance of land. An abundance of land for somebody who comes from an area on the planet where through an equal division of inheritance among all children, the average land holdings were maybe an acre and a half, right? And here we have this abundance of land and obvious wealth. There's no nobility in there. You know, they don't pay any tithe, for example. There is no established priests, whatever. Clearly, here the seeds are sown for his later life once he returns to Europe. But, of course, what appeals to Flohr here, what he describes, appeals to many others in Rochambeau's army. Who will react to that pull factor to stay in America? Not Rochambeau's French-speaking soldiers. New England is not only a potentially hostile environment, it is also an environment where there is no French-speaking community in there, right? Unlike for the Germans when they marched to Pennsylvania. There is already a welcoming community. There are people whom they know, there's the same language, there are many Lutherans and Calvinists and what have you. The push factors are there for all of Rochambeau's soldiers, as we read what he says here. But the pull, the welcoming environment, an already pre-established, pre-existing community that you can settle into does not exist for Rochambeau's French-speaking soldiers. Because the French-speaking soldiers and the French-speaking communities in the United States that exist, and they are where, for example, and who are they? Mamaroneck, New York, etc. Those are Huguenots. And you know what the Huguenots do when they see the soldiers of the King of France marching past? They shut their windows, because they know full well why Grandpa had to come to America, because he was driven out of France with the revocation of the Edict of Nantes, for example. And we even have an example of this up in Morristown, where there's Huguenots and also Germans who would come here. When they see the French soldiers come, they won't have anything to do with them because of what happened by these very French soldiers. So just as an aside, but we don't have all day here, I don't want to bore you too much. The high standard of living also resulted in high prices, but high prices were only one aspect of a society that was showing the strains of war that Flohr also talks about. The closer you got to New York City, he says, the more obvious became the absence of adult males. of men. He, up near Suffern, New York, he writes, it was certainly, if you saw a male, it was certainly an old man or a cripple, because all men from the age of 14 to 60 had to join the colors. He's talking about the militia now, of course. Wherever the regiment entered the camp, it was soon surrounded by beautiful American girls on horseback who wanted to buy free a soldier to marry them. In other words, redeem the years that they had left in their service, but such offers were always denied, and he writes even that as soon as one entered a house in Suffern, they asked immediately whether one would not want to stay with them. In other words, an enticement to desertion that we clearly have here. But that's New York, it would never happen in New Jersey, of course. Attempts of quarantining the French soldier regiment from the local population to prevent desertions were not really successful, but I just kind of explained to why that is. That was particularly obvious in Philadelphia, and here we see an encampment in Philadelphia. And here we see clearly something that Flohr, again, had never seen, anybody had ever seen from old Europe, and that is the layout of the city of Philadelphia, right? If you ever been to Europe, then no European city like that, right? It's like a cow path going through the cities in Europe, and the fountains in there, and then the harbor of Philadelphia. Those of you in Philadelphia, if you know where the 30th Street station is, that's on the other side of the river there, where the encampment was. Right here is 30th Street station. It's right along here. And here's another map of where the encampment was down in Philadelphia. Some of Flohr's most interesting social observations relate to slavery and slaves. In New England, he had already observed that wealthier farmers had numerous slaves, and he says, who are bought and sold like cattle. In Virginia, he found their treatment even worse. In Williamsburg, he writes, and he was watching how blacks spend their lives. He noted that at all times, the black people of Moors run around naked as God has created them. Supervised by white overseers, they have to do their master's work, men and women, young and old, in the cotton fields, again, without any clothes on. Flohr is proof of such nakedness, but observes that the blacks themselves also don't seem to mind. He said he was often embarrassed for them when he saw for them being the white people around them, women as well as men, and when he asked why slaves were not adequately clothed, the white Virginians told him that he could cost too much. Within 3 to 4 weeks, the clothing would be torn again, and the slaves weren't worth that much. This is one of the big differences between what you read in Flohr's journal and the observations about slavery by French officers. The top echelon, the colonels, etc., many of them had plantations in the West Indies, Ségur, for example. They were slave owners. And even if they weren't slave owners, there's the gap between the lowly peasants and the nobility. Even if the nobility was poor, the gap was still there and was being maintained. So the way how somebody who's an enlisted man coming from poverty looks at fellow human beings is very different than from the top down as we have them. And I don't care what anybody says that Lafayette didn't own slaves. No, he didn't, but he rented slaves, and the salaries went to the owner. He does this over here in the United States as well, and there's proof of that. What is also interesting, and just as an aside, is that Americans Americans also noticed that from New England in particular. And here's a statement by Josiah Atkins in the Light Infantry Battalion from the 5th Connecticut Regiment, and he writes, "This day, the 6th June of 1781, we passed General Washington's plantation, which is of large extent. So many of these parts, they tell me, own 30,000 acres of land, and many have 200 or 300 Negroes to work for them." And this is, he writes this as they're marching past Washington's Mount Vernon. Allah, that persons who pretend to stand for the rights of mankind, for the liberties of society, can delight in oppression, and that even of the worst kind. This is just one example. I have more of those. And I can't help but think that as these New Englanders getting to learn their country, they've never been to Virginia, none of them, and see this and go back up north, and people ask them what it's like, that when they describe this, this maybe is one of the driving forces. I will say I've seen it, I know I'm not telling you from somewhere else. This may be one of the driving forces behind the anti-slavery movement that comes up after the Revolutionary War is over. Because now we have hundreds, we have thousands of New Englanders who have actually seen it and are going back home, and they can say, this is true. You don't need to believe what these people tell you. I was there. How can we do this? Mr. Washington, who pretends to stand for the rights of mankind. But the other point that I want to make real quick is his observations about Indians. Again, he had never seen Native Americans as well. And his description of the Iroquois betrays a similar tolerance and concern for fellow human beings, irrespective of skin color, belief, or culture. He gives an exceptionally detailed description of the and stressing features, reporting like half naked, slit ears, nose and earrings, painted bodies, and a strange speech. But these descriptions are again fundamentally different in having no pejorative language. You know, when what officers call bizarre manners and grimaces and contortions and distasteful dancing, disgusting, is described by Flohr as wild music made in their own way, right? Wild music to accompany a wondrous way of dancing. Their speech sounds as if geese were cackling, something that others describe as a gibberish. So Flohr was amazed and surprised by the Native Americans. He was not disgusted in there. And here's another one of these descriptions by a Massachusetts writer about treatment of slaves. So I have dozens of those. Here's a quick drawing. I want to show you the quick drawing of the Indians that is in his journal. We see them, you know, doing agricultural work. The only person on horseback with a weapon is a white man, and he actually meets somebody, a German interpreter from the Palatinate, who says that he had been kidnapped or ended among the Indians, and he says, I'm never going to join white society again. I like it much better among the Indians, etc. They meet in a tavern. The officers are with the French ambassador, etc. They don't have this, you know, ear on the ground contact, which impacts their observations, obviously, as far as that's concerned. Okay, then as Sam already showed you, they marched through Trenton along the way to the siege of Yorktown, and that same image is over there. I wonder where Sam got that from. Here we are right here at the Trent house at the crossing at this very interesting earlier drawings. It's been Trenton here, and here again Trenton to Trenton Ferry, and that's a 1770s painting. map. They go down to Yorktown. Here's his sketch of Yorktown with the fortifications around in Gloucester over on the other side. They spent the winter of 1781-82 in and around Williamsburg, so he has time to draw this image of Williamsburg with the capital, William and Mary, etc. You know, if once you go there and stand at the end of the Dual Gloucester Street with the college behind you, you can use this for orientation. Once the war is over, they march back up to New York and then to Boston to go to the West Indies. Flohr describes, has also sketches about the West Indies in his journal here, and here's another one. There, Curacao, and then he goes back to Europe. He stays in Europe with his family. It doesn't work out apparently. You know, this guy was gone for 8 years, coming back. No, he eventually ends up in Strasbourg. Then he is in Paris. Story is that on his way to watch the execution of Louis XVI, there's a horrible accident and he's splattered with blood, and he realizes that the revolution is going a certain way that it might not be pleasant. So he decides to do what? He comes back to America. Now this seed of what he had seen and all that really pulls him to America. Let's get out of there. He lands in Baltimore, which is what I want to show you this image of Baltimore here. He's in Baltimore for, we don't know exactly how long, but we know that as early as 1793 he may have decided to come back to the United States, because in around 1795 he appears in Madison County, Virginia, where he studies theology under the Reverend William Carpenter at Hebron Lutheran Church. His name used to be Wilhelm Zimmermann, now it becomes William Carpenter. The oldest Lutheran church in Virginia, which makes it likely he entered via Baltimore, but I've never been able to verify any ship register records for that. Then he teaches German, teaches school among the German settlements in the New River Valley of Virginia. In the summer of 1799, he accepts a call to serve among the Germans around Wytheville in far western Virginia. His ministers bond in the Wythe County Courthouse, which still exists, which gave him the right to perform the rites of marriage, is dated 9 July 1799, and he's ordained a Lutheran minister in Baltimore on the 7th of June 1803. He marries in October of 1802, but there are no children. His house in Wytheville is still standing. His house is still standing, and when he died in 1826. Is owned by his widow, and when the house faced destruction in 1984 for real estate development, is purchased by Mr. Kegley, whom I happened to meet before he passed away, was disassembled and moved to this new site and reassembled. Next to this house there is not only the church where he preached in, but next to it is also his grave. His grave, which was made by a well-known carpenter, stonemason, whatever, and it's still there. And it's very, here's the church, the edge of the church, and it's very discernible because it has a headstone and a footstone, which is very uncommon. Not only is his stout house still standing, and the church, once a year in the summer, on the third Sunday of August, is called St. John's Day. That was the name of the church, in which a special service is held in this church on the grounds of the cemetery around the grave of Flohr, who was the first pastor of that church. In other words, he is not forgotten, and every year on the third Sunday of August, he's remembered there. Thank you very much. All right. Y'all have a piece of paper? Or do a quiz? No. Any questions that you may have? Yes, sir.
I have two questions. The first question is, how large is this journal? The dimensions?
Yeah.
And the second is he known in his town back in Germany?
The second question is easier to answer, no. Nobody knows about it yet. First question is, it's more than 200 handwritten pages, but it is available online. A couple years ago, as I said, somebody in France translated it, transcribed it, and translated it into English and into French, with all the images in there. So if you just Google it, or I give you my card, I can send you the link. The translation into English is pretty good, but don't follow the geography. I mean, the state line between Connecticut and Massachusetts is not in northern New Jersey. So if you read, when you read this carefully, the footnotes, you say, well, these people, none of these people who transcribed and footnoted had ever been here in the United States. And with the footnotes too, like I said, you need to be a little careful. But if you want to, and you can blow up the images now, and it's a pretty good translation.
How about the dimensions? How big is it?
How large it is?
Yeah.
Maybe like this, which is actually quite large for an 18th century journal. The diaries that French officers have are more like this size, if not smaller, so they could fit in the pocket. But again, he did this following his return to Germany. As he says, after he gave them aside after a certain amount of time, when he had time to think about it, then he must have pulled out his notes and written it down. And because the handwriting is the same, you can tell it was written down in one sitting, meaning like 2 weeks or 3 weeks of time.
Oh, extraordinary. Yeah. Visually, it's quite
very appealing.
I'm sorry to do this to you. I will say that you mentioned the vast numbers of different religions and religious influence that was inherent to the time period. Paganism was also still something that was practiced, and when I think of Pennsylvania, a lot of those practices have still carried down through tradition. I was just wondering if you had any information about that as also being one of the influences during the time.
He doesn't mention that at all. But I mean, the belief in witches and witchcraft is most certainly.
I'm not really referring to witches and witchcraft like the Salem witch trials. I'm speaking more of the animistic viewpoint and worldview of making offerings just to the world at large, to the cosmology.
No, I didn't see anything in his journal or in any of the French journals. There are, what's the man's name? Some oral histories were done. I wanted to talk about these kind of traditions that are still alive in the 1830s, 1840s or later. But that's up in Vermont, in these remoter areas, rather than in a more densely situated areas. At least that's how I ran across it. That's all I know.
Thank you. I know it's an odd question, but thinking of hexology and those types of practices.
No, I never ran across anything like that. So. All right. Thank you very much then. Oh, Paul had a question.
Quick question. Are you going to write a book about this and all the research you've done?
Probably not. I have a couple articles out,
Okay.
as you know,
Yeah.
William Mary Quarterly. There's one in American Heritage, if you
Okay.
remember that magazine that far back.
Mhm.
I did something in naval history about the transatlantic crossing. But like a translation or an edition, no, I don't know that I'll do that. It's because it's available anyway online, and you can download it for free. And just read it critically in there.
Before you go, I just wanted to say that the description that you provided from the journals about the slaves, how they were dressed and treated, that is the worst that I have ever heard. And it's the only time that I have ever heard of that being a practice as far as clothing goes and the treatment.
Yeah, again, we're not sure what he compares it with. And if and the only set of wealth and clothing, etc., that he can compare it with is what it is in a Palatinate where he's from. And that is one of the poorer areas, the poorest areas of Germany, which is why they come over here by the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, because the push factors to get out of this area where land has been divided for so many years already, to get out of an area that had been devastated by the wars of Louis XIV for decades already. Go to Heidelberg Castle, was never rebuilt, and all that. It's such a poor area there that coming here, where there is no nobility, there is no tithe, there is no courts run by noblemen, etc. There's such a huge difference in Sonnstadt, where it's from. The idea of owning a horse to ride around is just unimaginable for these people. And yeah, maybe not everybody was rich. Probably not everybody was rich in Connecticut. But when he compares it with where he's coming from, the difference is so huge. I mean, there are even terms for the impoverished nobility in German as well as in French, because so many of them, are not much better off than the peasantry that they are supposedly in charge of. That's what we must compare it with, and because that also helps to explain the fact that there were 150,000 Germans on the eve of the War of Independence who have come over here, pushed out into an area, a land that they don't really know anything about. It's more like, it can't be any worse. The ignorance really of where they're going is unimaginable almost. I have seen accounts, interrogations of Hessian deserters, coming up from Canada or from Saratoga and all that. They tell the Americans, when they ask, why are you deserting? Well, they thought that if they get to New Spain, right, they can walk to Old Spain and cross the Pyrenees and not back home. I mean, literally, that's what they're telling the interrogators. So they are the push into this new world that nobody had ever seen, and most people in the 18th century, when they come here, they don't go back to Germany or anywhere else making it. But the push on the stories and the hope of what they're going to find must have been so strong that they left anyway. Good, thank you very much. Now I'll find out